So essentially the way that we're going to operate this is we're going to start off, there's going to be a little bit of Pete talking here, talking about how he thinks that competitors should begin to prep or begin to think about competition or perhaps frame it for themselves in order for them to get the most out of it. And then we're going to open it up to questions for everybody who's attending, and Pete will begin to answer those questions. So let's go ahead and get started.
Okay, yeah. Yes, sir.
I know that you definitely asked about competition or competition-related questions consistently. And I know you've spent the better part of 7 years competing, and that's definitely a lot of experience. Essentially, more than 15 minutes at a time. You've got more than 8 hours combined standing in front of the judges.
Yeah.
So what are some things, some bullet points, if you will, going forward that you think a competitor who's already placed in the top 6 of their region should begin thinking about going forward into the United States Barista Championship?
Well, that's a good question. When you've made it to the top 6, you've made it to the finals of your region. Clearly, you have a lot that you're offering. Is it enough to make it to the top of the USBC? That's another question. Really, what I would say is, generally speaking, people are making good coffee. They're preparing good espresso. Could it be better? Maybe so. And they're usually have a pretty cohesive story and presentation that they're giving the judges. What really steps it up and turns it into something else is when you can take that presentation, you can take what you're saying, you can take how you're saying it and how you're showing it and presenting it to the judges, and really, really focus it and dial it in to essentially, what I would consider a great story and a great way of telling that story. Obviously, everything else comes into play: technical skills, the method that you're using to prepare your coffee, the coffee that you're using, all these other things, and those are all, a little bit intangible because it depends on what you're using and why you're using it. But really, really taking what you're saying and honing it down, and kind of really, really focusing it and fine-tuning everything is really what I tell people a lot of times.
Sure. Well, it's an interesting thing. So again, you're talking about the story and honing it in and bringing it down, and you have 2 WBC appearances, and both of those were kind of vastly different, I think, in how you were telling a story. Even though essentially, we're all telling the same story. This was a coffee tree. This was the man who planted it. This is where it was picked. This is how it was processed. This is how it was roasted, and this is what it's going to taste like. What was it that made, I guess essentially, how is it that you honed in this second time around that got you that first place versus what got you a second place? I mean, what is that distinction or that difference in your mind?
Well, really a lot of it was a natural progression of myself, what I was doing, and what I was focusing on. So it kind of started, in 2011 is when I really started focusing on the farm, the source, the origin, processing methods, how all these things are done, and even how those relate to flavor as well. But it wasn't as focused on, kind of the representational role that it ended up turning into in 2013. It was still taking a lot of those same ideas, of talking about where the coffee came from, why it tastes the way that it does, and what has happened to change that flavor and affect that flavor. But then, kind of I didn't ever even talk about roasting in 2011, which I learned how to roast and roasted all my coffee for that competition too, but I never talked about it.
Right.
And kind of try to take what was a lot of data, because both of those times I had just an enormous amount of data and information that I wanted to give, that I had about the coffee itself and about everything else that was going on with it, but organizing that information in a way that was easy to digest by the judges, as also made sense as far as an experience for the judges in the judging pool. And so yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that's a really interesting point, because you're right. We do, when all of these finalists have crafted their routine, they have like a significant amount of information, and they want to share that with the judges. What's the cutoff point? When do you decide what information is extraneous and what information is absolutely vital?
Well, I mean, a lot of that ends up coming down to the flavor, and what the judges are experiencing through that coffee. Because there's a couple ways you can look at it. It's like how much information can you take in in a 15-minute period and write about it, taste it, experience it, evaluate it, give all the scoring that you have to do as a judge, and then and still enjoy that experience. Because it can be pretty amazingly overwhelming when someone's just nonstop talking to you and talking to you and talking to you, and you don't even have time to write something down and to really digest it mentally, let alone tasting it and everything else that they want you to do. So usually I'll start with what is affecting flavor and why is it relevant to the flavor that you're tasting. Right. So if you're talking about a processing method, what does that have to do with anything? I can tell you the elevation of a coffee, but if it doesn't really relate to anything specific that you can tell me, then why are you even talking about it at that point? Because you have so many other things to talk about that are relevant to that experience. And I mean, there's a little bit of a wiggle room. I mean, there's no one way to present information. There's no one right set of information that's correct to say. It's really just what makes sense for what you're trying to say and what you're trying to explain. And so that's where I start. I start with all the relevant information, and there's plenty of it. And one of the danger points of that too is when we don't have something, like we have all this information, we're like, I need this to be relevant, and then you start to kind of stretch the truth a little bit on what it is. This flavor is coming from this, and it's like, is it really coming from that? I don't know if it is. So you have to be careful, and because your judges are professionals, your judges know what they're talking about, generally speaking, and there's it's not a deception contest. It's a contest of your professionalism, what you really know is happening with this coffee. Then that can even just be the difference between saying this did this, or saying the way that we understand it right now is that this affects this flavor specifically like this. And those two different statements say the same thing, but you're not trying to be uncertain, but you're trying to say this is the way that we understand it, and that's why I'm presenting it to you. And so those types of things are always extremely important.
Sure.
The other.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say one other really big thing that I think is vital when you're looking at a speech and you're looking at data that you're putting in, is really looking at yourself as the professional, because it's a barista competition. You should be showcasing you as a professional barista. And so how does this data, how does your experience, how does everything tie in with you? Where do you fit into this story? And what makes you an expert about it? So that one I think is really important. And I think that we've started way back, we went from just kind of making coffee to be making coffee and whatever to then just nonstop talking about farmers and farming and things like that, to now we've gone back, I think, to a level in the barista competitions where we're actually focusing more on the barista themselves and really looking at things other than just farm data and interesting aspects.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that there's, because number one, there's a lot about what information is presented, but I think there's also a significant portion, and this is again assuming, all of the coffees are working on a certain level. Everybody's espresso's tasties. All of these cappuccinos are great. But I've so often heard it's not what you say, it's how you say it, right? And would you say that is very applicable to the barista competition itself as well? I mean, is there something to your personality coming through, or maybe having sort of like a mask or presenting somebody kind of different on stage, or how would you go about talking about that?
Well, how you say something, this goes, straight to the point of presenting anything. Whether you're giving a speech on a stage, you're accepting an award, or you're competing in a barista competition, the way that you hold yourself and present yourself as a speaker, and just kind of your knowledge base, things like that, and these all affect the judges on how they are receiving your information and your presentation in general. That said, I do feel like the judges want to see more of you, and that was my experience with judging myself. Was that I want somebody who maybe you made a mistake, or there's something wrong, and if you can sit there and you can smile about it, take care of it, and be a professional, but then be able to move on and not let it kind of just ruin your whole mentality and the way that you're holding yourself. That speaks a lot to me as well, because it's like, yeah, you know what, I spilled something, but hey, I got this thing, I'm going to clean it up and it's done, and let's keep going, let's keep talking. Someone who's really genuine and really, like I say, presenting themselves as opposed to presenting a mask, because I think that or some other personality, because that's it's fake. It's not what anybody wants to see, really.
Well, I think that kind of leads me to this next idea of, are there certain personalities that are presented that do better in competition than others? Is there an archetype of a barista champion that the judges are looking for, that some people, if they're being truly themselves, just aren't capable or aren't able to fill?
I don't know if I would say there's an archetype. I would say that, honestly, some people just are that, outgoing, gregarious type of person that you automatically like. And some people don't have they're not as comfortable, being that open with somebody right off the bat, or with a stranger or something like that. And so those can be hurdles. I don't think that it's a necessity, but it's something that if you aren't naturally open with people, which I'm not, generally speaking, as far as just meeting strangers, it's something that you have to identify and realize, and take action to adjust so that you are received and are, thought of in a way that you might not normally interact with somebody. So I don't think that there's necessarily a one type of person who generally does better, but really it just comes down to like really knowing yourself and being able to say, this is really who I am, and this is how I want to present it, and being careful to present yourself in a way that comes across well.
Certainly. So a lot of what we've talked about so far is actually when you're on stage, being able to connect with the judge, connect what you're talking about to the flavors that the judges are experiencing. But obviously, there's a lot of stuff that goes into the competitions beforehand. Right now, we're already pretty deep into the competition season. Obviously, a lot of people have already practiced their routines and have a lot of stuff down. What is it that can take a top 6 regional finalists, and what can they do between now and the USBC essentially to help ensure that they can get into the USBC finals, at which point it could be anybody's game?
Making it to the top 6 in the USBC finals is honestly one of the hardest things I've tried to do in competition. And for people who've made it multiple times, it's a huge accomplishment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why even when in 07 and 08, I made second place twice, but I was a little down about it. But then I had somebody tell me, they said, well, I mean that's consistency, and that's not an easy feat. And I thought about that. And so, I mean, there's like some of our competitors in the last couple of years who've been in the top 6. It's like that's even if you didn't win, you've made an enormous accomplishment. But that said, there's a lot of things you can do to organize yourself and get yourself ready, and try and prepare as much as possible. I find organizing things to be of a huge value, whether it is, and this is all, if we're talking about my last blog post, there's a lot of things that I've kind of put in there, but there's so much more information, so we'll go into a lot of this stuff. The very first basic thing for organization is really creating lists and checklists and things that are just kind of, when you're in the tightness that is the run up to your presentation time at USBC, everything happens all at once, it seems like, and everybody's always in a hurry, and the person backstage is yelling at you to move your cart out on the stage, and it's like, I don't even have it set yet, I don't even have my stuff on my cart, but any way that you can alleviate that, having a list where you can just go down it and check, yes, I have this, so that that you're not forgetting anything. I've forgotten things on stage a couple of times, actually. Usually it's not a big deal, but sometimes it is. One time I forgot a towel that I was going to be using, and I just happened to have an extra. I actually forgot my apron towel to wipe out my portafilters with, I had an extra one that was on my table setting, or on my side table setting, that I just happened to have. That wasn't 100% necessary, but it was a little more cosmetic. So I just pulled that off of there, put it on my apron real quick, and made sure I had it. But this is where you want to have a checklist of all these things, because that way you can run down, you can physically inspect and see, like, I have this, I don't have this, I need this. These are the things we need to get done before we're ready to wheel out on stage. I find that even preparing your your table setups and knowing exactly where every single thing will go on that table setup during your actual presentation time helps you to organize and to be essentially you're basically going to be maximizing your efficiency scores, because everything is exactly where you need it, and it's in the order that you're going to use it, and it's just like, it makes perfect sense. It's just 1, 2, 3, everything's right down a row, the way that you're going to use it, and that's functionality to me. One thing that I do caution people about, and this kind of goes in a slightly different direction with getting ready for the USBC, and this is practicing your presentation. I see what happens a lot of times, it's good to practice your presentation. Obviously, the whole 15 minutes, every little detail that you're going to be doing, as closely as you can possibly get it to that competition setup, because that creates organization in your mind. You already know where things are going to be and how it's going to function. Obviously, not everybody has that set up, so you have to do what you can. Imagine that this is the way it's going to be on the stage, so that you're thinking ahead when you actually get there. But one of the problems that I've run into personally is practicing too much, and actually practicing to the point where you get bored with it. And really, when you're presenting, when you're at the USBC, you need to be excited about what you're doing, because you need that to be infectious, that the judges are also excited about it.
Sure.
Right?
Which excited doesn't necessarily mean loud and over animated.
No, not at all.
It's just something that exudes from your personal excitement.
Absolutely. There's kind of an energy that they feel your excitement. When you see somebody who's really happy and excited about something they're doing, you know it, and you're like, I want to get in on that too, because this is obviously something that's cool, but it's kind of like that, So anyway, the point of that is to say, if you practice, do your whole run through like 100 times. This was way back in like '06. We had this guy who was trying to do that. You did the whole presentation 100 times in a row in preparation. Then when you actually get up on stage, it's like, yes, I'm doing exactly what I plan to do and everything else, but it seems really robotic, methodical, and kind of lackluster in a lot of ways, because it's not exciting to you. You're basically just going through the motions at this point. You're not, feeling that passion for what you're doing, and you're not giving that to the judges.
You're running on autopilot.
Yes, and it seems really, really easy to you. Like you're doing something really difficult, and you're executing it really easily. But that's because you've done it so many times that it's like a routine for you now. That's why I also don't call it a routine. I call it a presentation. So actually what I do is I break down sections of the speech, sections of the presentation, do them separately. This last year I actually broke down into, working one day just working on my espressos and my espresso speech and the way everything was working in that part of my speech, from the introduction through the espresso course. And then the next day I would just work on the cappuccino presentation. And then the next day I would just work on the signature drink presentation. And maybe the fourth day I would put it all together and do the whole thing. And then, just kind of, because you want to keep it all fresh and you want to keep it moving and, refining your speech and all these other things. But you don't want it to get, kind of drab and dull in your own mind.
Right.
So I think that's...
No,
I think what I was going to say is I think that, keeping it in your head and always, you're thinking about it, going through your speech, going through all of your movements as much as you can. But don't overdo it, because that just takes away from it, in honesty.
That's some great advice. I have another question for you about, obviously everybody wants to maximize their score sheets, right? Find the area where you can get like the absolute most points. And I think at this point it's pretty common knowledge that everybody's looking at all of the multipliers, right? So your taste balance scores, your flavor scores, your tactile scores. But that's up to your individual skill. The question is, how do you score better on espressos? Well, you make better espressos, right? That's sort of like the easy answer. But at the same time, there's this word that's in the score sheets, this balance terminology that I think is very confusing for a lot of people as to what is balance and what are people looking for when they talk balance. Does a more espresso forward cappuccino necessarily get it better taste balance scores? Does something that has a level of medium acidity and medium sweetness and medium bitterness get to better flavor scores? Or how have you gone about thinking about it in those terms?
Well, that's a good question. A lot of it comes down to, depending on the course. So say, obviously we were talking about the espresso. The espresso balance scores, as they are now, half of your score is based off of just straight up balance of acid, bitter, and sweetness. And then, of course, the other half is your flavor descriptors, things like that. To me, balance is literally neither of those three things, acid, sweet, and bitterness, overpowering the other. Really, it's a difficult thing to do because everybody tastes a little bit differently. The judges, as they do so much work calibrating and making sure that the judging is fair and done properly. So I definitely don't want to sound like I'm naysaying on something. But it's a subjective thing what you're tasting. And so you have to kind of play to the safe side. And in my opinion, the safe side is sweetness, because sweetness is considered the most difficult thing to get out of your espresso, right?
I think any barista would agree with you on that point.
Right. And some of that has to do with the coffee that you're using and how it's roasted, and then some of it is also definitely based off of extraction and the way that your methodology is done. Acid is a difficult thing too, because when you think of acid in the United States especially, people love acid. Acid. It's the holy grail of coffee, it seems like. And to me, it can you can have way too much acid for sure. And different techniques with your methodology or your extraction are definitely going to have a different effect on the flavor that's coming out of it. You can cup maybe the most balanced coffee you've ever tasted, but if you don't extract it the right way, then it's not going to taste balanced.
Right.
So for me, it's, I look for sweetness first, I look for acid secondary, and bitterness is pretty easy to come by in a lot of ways. So it's not, you're not looking for a cup that has bitterness in it so much as you are through roast and through extraction. You can get enough bitterness out of it that it balances it.
Right.
And the idea of it, and I don't always like to think of it just as those three characteristics, because espresso is an incredibly complex beverage. But when you think of that bitterness, you think of a balancing act. Because if you just have sweet and acid, it's not balanced. It's like, oh, this is kind of pleasant, but it's really missing something. And it actually needs that bitterness to just bring up the complexity in the back of the cup and the bottom, and really just round it all out. So that's the whole idea with it. Generally speaking, I found, I look at the grinder that I'm using, the espresso machine that I'm using, the portafilter baskets, and then of course the coffee, how it's roasted and how dense it is, to look at how I'm going to extract that coffee. I've always found with the Malcona grinders and the Simonelli espresso machines and the VST baskets that a faster extraction works a little bit better for me.
Okay. So when you say faster?
Last year I had shots between 19 and 22 seconds, generally speaking. And for a lot of people that is just gushing. And they're also pretty full extractions too. Almost your full ounce. We're 38 grams out, things like that. And then of course this is all the way that I did things. Everybody has different methods, and they feel they get the best flavor for different reasons. One of the biggest hurdles with that is the body, because when you have a fast extraction like that, most people say it doesn't have a good body, and there's a perception of just syrupy, thick, sticky espresso being a good body, and sometimes what that really means is that you haven't put enough water through the coffee grinds, for one thing. Generally speaking, it can be very pleasant, but it's not always. For me, sometimes it's a little bit sour because a little under extracted. And in the competition, the body that they're looking for isn't necessarily just syrupy. They're looking for the heaviness, the weight of the coffee, the smoothness, and the tactile feel of the body.
Sure. Perhaps like mouthfeel would be a better way to think about it.
Yeah.
Rather than in terms of body.
Yeah, I mean, they're usually interchanged, but there's kind of a different way of thinking about that, I guess. And for me, I mean, I use descriptors like silky and velvety and buttery and things like that because that's really the way that it was. I mean, it has a very different texture to it. It's not syrupy and thick and heavy so much as it is just smooth and really pleasant mouthfeel. And so that's one of the big things that I try to tell people is to experiment with different types of extraction, even the types of things that you don't think are going to be the best. Sometimes you'll get a surprise and you'll find something different, and it may not be that you're going to just use that extraction, but you might learn a way that you can get more out of what you're extracting, looking at the body and the flavor profile.
So just a couple of more questions, and then we're going to open it up to the people who are here. I want to ask you, on both of the score sheets, both the technical and the sensory, what was it that you found that was the most difficult to increase your score in, and how did you find a way to increase your score in that category?
Wow. Boy, I want to say espressos and cappuccinos are, really up to the coffee you're using, the milk, and your execution of it more than anything. The one thing that I probably the most difficulty getting a high score on probably ever was the kind of professionalism, passion, dedication type of scores.
Okay.
And they've kind of consolidated those. There are not as many separate ones. There used to be like a professionalism score and a passion score and things like that. And but it's always difficult because that's one of those things that I was always trying to understand. Like, how are you scoring this? I mean, it's like I just put my heart out and I just like ripped it out and like stuck it on the table for you, and he gave me like a 3.5 for passion.
Ouch! Yeah.
What do you want? What do I have to do, to get a better score? And that was actually something. What's that?
I was going to say, makes me think of the scene in Gladiator. He's holding the sword. Are you not entertained?
Right. Right. And that was actually something that a lot of judges couldn't ever really explain to me. And I don't know if it was they're trying not to trying not to coach or whatever else, and so they don't say something specific like that, or if they just don't really know exactly why they scored that. That's just what they felt like at the time, But the what it really came down to for me was, and this is not as like vague knowledge now, but the professionalism score, the passion score. Passion was really basically just professionalism. How much do you know about the coffee? How do you present it? How do you, kind of promote the coffee? How are you a representative of the coffee industry? Things like that. And for me, I was always just like, I'm passionate. You can tell I'm passionate, but it was really just like the professionalism is really what it was. Even though they were kind of different scores, it was pretty similar stuff. And that's one of the reasons why there's so much more focus on, like I said, talking about you as a barista, how you're interacting with the coffee and what makes you a professional. Basically giving them the information so that they can assess that you are a professional, that you are a stand-up great barista. That really plays into the professionalism and passion scores and things like that. They're a little intangible. It's hard to really explain what it is, but you just have to. You got 15 minutes, and you got to prove to these people that you're the best barista in the world, or whatever, right? and that's tough. That's really
Yeah.
difficult to do. So I think it's really kind of, you have to take all of that information and try and meld it together and make it into this one digestible little pill of coffee information that they can take in 15 minutes, you know, and not feel sick afterwards. Um,
Cool.
yeah.
All right. Thank you for that. We'll go ahead now, and I'll actually, for those of you who are on the call, if you want to type a question into the question box, or if you want to go ahead and just sort of hit the hand icon and raise your hand, I'll unmute you, and then you'll be able to ask a question, something maybe particular to you or something that you've seen, and you'll be able to pose that to Pete and have an opportunity to have him answer that. So I'll give you all just a little bit to think about that, kind of gather your thoughts, get ready to click that raise your hand icon to raise your hand so that I know that you have something to say. And meanwhile, I'm going to go ahead and ask Pete. Oh, wait, we got one question in here, actually. So this is from Patrick, and it says, as a previous judge, what surprised you the most about being on that side of the table?
Oh, there's a couple. There's a couple of things I would say. Probably the one that was the most surprising. One was the protocol, okay, of tasting espresso. This totally changed how I presented to the judges and served the judges. The judges have to, unless you tell them otherwise, they have to go through the protocol of stirring the, tilting the cup, checking the crema. At the time, you had to look at color too, and all those things. Stirring the espresso up, taking 2 sips, thinking about all the things that you've said about that coffee, writing notes about it, and saying, does this taste the way that you said it does? Is it balanced the way that we want it to be? If you look at that espresso scoring element, there's a lot, and that's why we focus so much on it, is because those points are so important. There's so many points in there, and guess what? That judge has to evaluate and think about all those points while they're tasting that coffee. So if you're talking to them while they're tasting it, it really makes it really difficult to judge. And the other one that was really, really surprising to me was the latte art element of the cappuccinos. I knew the foam depth and the foam texture and all those things, but the latte art component is funny because he's like, I really want to go for that, difficulty point. And there's no difficulty point on the latte art.
No bonus points for swans, huh?
No bonus points for swans or for another tier in your tulip or anything like that. It's the five visual criteria, which are, and if I can remember them, the centering, the brown ring and the contrast of color, the symmetry of the design, and like the shiny sheen of the foam on top. That's what they're looking at. They're not looking at how many tiers you put on your tulip, or how many rosettas you made in your cup, or anything like that. They're just looking on, is it symmetrical? Is it centered in the cup? Is it good? Is it have good contrast? Is the foam texture good? And that one just absolutely surprised me because I just never knew, and nobody ever explained that to me.
Well, there you go, Patrick. That's the answer to that question. Well, you guys think of some more questions, either typing into the box or raising your hand. Pete, I know that
Yes.
So what somebody who necessarily doesn't have an unlimited amount of funds that they can go about trying to find ways to, compete on a budget or keep it under budget, as it were. A couple of real simple bullet points there.
Well, it's interesting that we have regional finalists here because I usually tell people that the higher in the level that you go, the more that you really need to be concerned with um, the visual appeal and the expensive items that you have, if you will. That said, the competition is trying to go further and further away from stuff, and having all of this really cool handcrafted crazy equipment. Um, if you have a piece of equipment already, say it's a board that you serve your espressos on, or it's a tray, or it's coffee mugs, or it's glassware, like water glasses or spoons. I use the same spoons for like 3 years of competition. I mean, there's no, why would I change that? It's a spoon, a lot of that stuff really is not that important as long as it's clean. It's not chipped or visibly unappealing in some way. If there's like a giant gash or a scratch on it, yeah, it's probably not going to look too good. And as long as it's functional, does it look good? Is it functional? That's really what matters. Now that said, I mean, so at the regional level, I mean, there's a lot of people who they won't really do much on their table setting. It'll be very minimalistic. It's got that black laminate on the top now, so it doesn't look ugly if you don't have a tablecloth or something. The higher level you go, and I usually like to say, especially starting at the USBC, but even just, you'll see the people who are more experienced, the people who have, gone to the higher levels and done successfully. They start at the regional level now with more stuff on their table and more things.
Right.
It's not 100% necessary. It creates a visual kind of idea in people's heads that, oh, this is going to be really good, or it's not, or whatever. It just needs to look good. You can go anywhere and get a piece of cloth that you need for your table, or towels. You don't need to buy the finest towels. You don't need to be buying all this other stuff. Have a good set of cups. Have a generally nice setup, and things that actually make sense and work properly. I've gone to discount shops, antique stores, garage sales, if you want to, things like that, to find cool and interesting stuff that's not terribly expensive. I've also earlier on in competing, the first couple 2-3 years was competing, I was definitely in the stuff phase, is what I call it.
Right.
And this is what I consider a young competitor who doesn't have a lot of experience with it. It's just a natural thing that happens, really. You basically just you see the cool things, like, oh man, these glasses are amazing. I just bought some, but I gotta buy these too because these are awesome. These are even better.
Right.
And you end up buying so much stuff, so much junk that you either never use, or you use once and you never use it again, or whatever. And one of the hardest things to do for a barista competitor is to move yourself out of the stuff phase faster. Because you stop focusing on the cool stuff and the small wares and everything else, and you start focusing a lot more on the things that really matter. So to describe it, at the regional level, I mean, my last year, I spent pretty little at the regional level. I mean, I had purchased cups already, so the mugs are always a pretty decent expense if you're going to get some decent ones. But I mean, go to the Walmart and get some, rocks glasses for your water if you want, or I bought a ream of cloth, and actually at the regional I didn't even use cloth. I just had pre-printed little placemats for the judges that actually was cheaper than buying a tablecloth.
Right.
at the Nationals, I just bought a ream of cloth and had there's an older lady who was a friend of a friend, and she liked sewing, and so I was just like, hey, if she can just sew this, hem it up so that I can have a little table runner, that'd be perfect. And that's all it was, It cost me like $10 for some cloth, and you know, made some pie for the lady down the street, to sew to sew the cloth for, it doesn't have to be anything crazy as long as it looks good and functions, and then of course, when you talk about going to the world level later on, they give you a prize for travel and for small wares and things like that. Use it. you know, this is why they give you these things, is so that you can buy nicer things, make it look really polished, and make everything look super, super clean. Because when you think about the best in the world at something, or even the best in the United States at something, there's a certain level of quality that you're expecting to see.
Right.
You can't go out and not set the table and make the table look really nice, because it's not gonna give as good of an impression. And it's something that, a few extra bucks here will make a difference. At lower levels, it actually is not that important. That's not what the judges are focused on.
Cool. Well, we got some questions in here, kind of related questions from Sam and Andrew. Sam asks, what is your process for developing a signature drink? And as sort of a follow-up after you've answered that, Andrew's asking, how has your judging influenced the way that you would approach a signature drink?
Well, the signature drink, and I had, before judging, I had, because I'll kind of answer both these in tandem, because they do have a lot, they have a lot to do with each other. Before judging, I had a lot of thoughts about making signature drinks, and a lot of the signature drinks I made were actually more like food pairings. They were a bite of something and a drink of something else, and how they work together, which I still love. I think it's a great experience of coffee and the potential of that coffee. I mean, you don't see a lot of people with bacon or with cheese or whatever with their coffee, and it's not necessarily the best idea, because it doesn't necessarily relate to the coffee, but it tastes really good with it. So that said, I had a lot of things like that. Even up to 2011, I was focusing on, like, how do I pull coffee into everything, and I was obviously processing coffee, and I'm like, oh, I got all the cherry pulp, I'm going to dry some out, and I'm going to use that for my signature drink. I'm drying the mucilage for a honey coffee. I'm gonna save the parchment with the mucilage on it and use that for my signature drink. And that started to change my mind about how I'm looking at the signature drink. But at that point, it wasn't relevant to the flavor of the coffee at all. It was relevant to the coffee and where it came from, which I think still is so as well. But when I judged, now I started to see. And I always felt this way before, but taking coffee and taking the flavor of that coffee and using that with complementary ingredients that highlight the flavor, and this is the way it was kind of explained to me when I was learning, the judges certification, was highlighting and enhancing and elevating the flavor of the espresso, as opposed to masking it, as opposed to just pairing flavors together that are already in the coffee, things like that. You really want to create an experience that elevates and enhances it. And so, now, to kind of Sam's question, my process became much more organic. Like, what am I tasting in this coffee, and what would kind of elevate it? What would change it for the better? What's it, for lack of a better term, missing? Because you don't want to insinuate that your espresso is missing something, but so last year I had this really grapey acid coffee. It was really, really tartaric. It was tannic. It was kind of heavy dates and figs and things like that, and the sweetness and the depth of the cup. So it had a lot of dark, heavy flavors. If you think of it that way, some people think of colorations for their flavors, things like that. Well, what's it missing? It's missing some brightness. It's missing some citrus. didn't have a citrus-like acidity to it. It had a different type of acidity to it. And so I was trying to think of how do I take these flavors and make them come together in a complementary way that actually makes something that's even better than the original shot of espresso. So that took a little bit of trial and error, and you have to experiment. You have to see what works, what doesn't. This is good, but it needs something a little bit more. And yeah, I mean, so that's one of the main ways that I think about making a drink. The other real main thing I was focused on personally was a method of making that drink, which is where I came with both, went with stirring with ice. It was not an original idea. People have done it before. Don't get me wrong. I even judged, and Ryan Knapp used mixing glasses and stirrers and julep strainers and things like that. It's just, to me, it's just an elegant, beautiful way to prepare a drink. It's not so much of an original idea so much. But I wanted to use something like that because I had that idea of like, oh, I want to show more people that we can use these kind of cocktailing type of techniques, and with what we're doing as baristas. Nothing makes me happier than to see someone who's using an actual shaker or using a stirring with ice or a stirring glass or something like that in a cafe, because it's like, yeah, it's a tool and it works really well and it makes really good flavors with coffee. So why are we so afraid to use these things? Why are we still sitting here with a blender or whatever we've been using for a long time? So I had that. It was, for me, it was kind of twofold this last year. It was trying. I want to use these methods. I actually had the idea to do something shaken and something stirred, and a bunch of other stuff, and it just never panned out. It just actually tasted better than the simpler the drink actually was.
Right.
But the flavor-wise is kind of like I explained. It's really trying to think of it as not so much as an ingredient, but a major component of something that's going to have other ingredients affecting it. So that's kind of the major way I do it.
Sure. So your signature drink has been served. Have you always served your signature drink as the last course?
Not always. 2011, I didn't. I served it first.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah.
But would you say, even in then you incorporated all of the different ingredients and all of the different components of all of the different processes. Mm-hmm. Would you say that you use your signature drink as a sort of anchor to your overall thesis or theme of what it is that you're presenting in that 15 minutes?
Absolutely. And this comes back to telling the story properly and telling it in a way that is digestible for the judges to take in. Really, when you get down to it, every single course that you're serving and every single thing that you're saying should tell a full and complete story. So yes, the signature drink is always something that anchors or ties in or really makes it all happen. So in 2011, it was, for the purpose of telling the story, it really made the most sense to serve my signature drink first, because basically what I was doing is I was making a blend of coffee. I had 3 different beans, and I was trying to make a culmination of what all this added up to make that final shot of espresso and why it's so good. And I actually started with just the simplest base of the coffee, which was the honey coffee that I was using as kind of a body component and sweetness. And of course I used, that year I didn't feel that the tie of the signature drink was as strong as it could have been. But really I was saying, like, well, here's the fruit and here's the mucilage and here's all this stuff together that you're tasting. That's where this came from. This is why it's so sweet. This is why why it's such an amazing coffee. But it's basically just like, so here's the base, here's the foundation of the coffee, the espresso that I'm going to be making. Cappuccino is 2 other ones that are brighter and bringing out. It's unbalanced as an espresso, but it works great in a cappuccino. And so here's the cappuccino. This is why I'm using these ingredients, and this is why these coffees are here. And then now I've taken all 3 of these coffees together, blended them up, yeah, and serve them in the final espresso.
Yeah, you were able to use your signature drink to explain your espresso.
Yeah.
And then this last year, you actually used your signature drink to explain what you were talking about for the entire process. Right?
More or less, yeah. I mean, it really, I had really wanted to make it roll back into itself and tie all together really nice and tidy. But, I was using it as a representational role. So each round of drinks was a representation, and the espresso was the farmer, the cappuccino was essentially the roaster, and the signature drink was me. Because I'm talking about techniques and talking about ways that I affect the coffee, things like that. And it makes perfect sense. It's, like you have your rawest form being the espresso itself. You have kind of a slightly different aspect of it in the cappuccino, and you really, I changed the extraction of it because I was trying to get more of the actual roast character and things that are not, as you're not looking for specifically in the espresso, to come through in the cappuccino. And then in the signature drink, it's it's like, yeah, it's just a regular shot of espresso, the raw ingredient. But now I, as a professional, as a barista, am the person who's going to affect and change it and put these things together, and these are the reasons why I've done that and everything else. And so it kind of reinforced that thesis statement of, all of us working together, and also me being a barista and a professional, and basically, I guess, the world barista champion at this point.
It's okay to say that. You can say that out loud.
I can say it now. I can say it now.
It's not bragging. So I think that's about going to wrap us up, unless there's any final questions. I don't see any final questions coming in from anybody else. Pete, on behalf of all of the U.S. coffee competitors, I want to thank you very much for giving us an hour of your time to pick your brain and hopefully be able to send on a worthy and future World Barista champion from the U.S.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here, and best of luck to everybody. I hope that this information is helpful and it helps you to do even better at the competition.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, everybody's just saying thanks, and they appreciate what you've done. So with that, on behalf of the Barista Guild of America, I was Lorenzo Perkins with Pete Licata, and we're going to call it a day.